We are doing a swing analysis for David. The first thing we want to look at is David's setup. David has a nice wide base. His feet are more than shoulder width apart. The one thing that I see that I like to see David, his front foot is closed, whereas we would like to see it either neutral or slightly open. So if that front toe was pointing slightly open on this red line, it would allow his hips to clear a little bit sooner. David's hand position is decent, high up near his shoulder, or his armpit actually. I like to see David's hands back a little bit farther and a little bit sooner. Now let's review David's load or coil. I'm going to draw a line on David's back shoulder through his back knee. We'll see the first move that David makes is actually David is swaying backwards. So his back shoulder actually traveled a good 6 or 8 inches. David's weight has completely gotten on his back side and he's off on his front side. Instead of swaying backwards, I prefer to see David coiling, where the front knee comes down, the front hip comes in, and the front shoulder comes in. David has no hip movement here. He does have a little bit of shoulder separation as his shoulder comes in. David can correct this by getting an even balance at setup, 50-50 weighting on the balls of his feet, and instead of leaning backwards, coiling backwards. Let's look at David upon foot plant. One thing we notice, David's hands are starting to come forward prior to his front foot hitting the ground. We'd like to see David holding off and rotating his lower body in advance of his shoulders and the back coming forward. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. So this is David at the short position. You'll notice he has a firm front leg and his spine angle is very good. It's lined up exactly along that firm front leg. His bed angle is perpendicular, or generally perpendicular to that spine angle, which is all excellent. His back knee is hinged. But the one thing that I notice is that he has not rotated his hips prior to starting to release the bat. At this point, or at this position, I would like to see David's back foot completely turned and pointing towards the pitcher, which would tell me that his back hip has rotated in advance of his shoulders. Here's David just at contact. David does a good job. He's making contact just about at his front foot, so he's doing a good job of waiting for the ball to get back at him. You'll notice at contact, he actually has now completely rotated his hips, and his back foot is pointed towards the pitcher. So we want to increase the timing of that and get that to happen a little bit earlier. And so here's David at extension. Good job at extension. The bat is pointing towards the second baseman or the second base side of the pitcher. His hands are turning over. And he's finishing the swing. Let's compare David against a model Major League hitter. First, let's look at the coil that the Major League hitter makes. You will see that the Major League hitter is coiling as he's striding forward. This hitter has a high leg kick similar to David's. You'll notice that his front hip is moving slightly in and his front shoulder is moving slightly in. He did not sway back at all, as opposed to David, who swayed back a little bit. Let's look at the Major League hitter. At foot plant, Focus on his hands and the bat angle. His front foot hits the ground and his bat still has not moved much forward towards the ball. So David's foot is about to hit the ground. You can see his front foot hits the ground and the bat angle has already started moving forward. What that tells me is David is casting his hands and releasing his hands a little bit too early. The impact of that is a reduction in power, and secondly, David will tend to hit the ball from the outside of the ball as opposed to keeping the barrel square. Let's look at the major league hitter at his short position. Here's his short position. The back heel has almost completely rotated towards the pitcher. The hips are square to the ball and the shoulders are held back. So in this case, David's shoulders and hips are at about the same angle. And this is just after his short position where the bat is being released into the zone. You notice the box that the major league hitter has. Bend in the front arm. Back elbow relatively tight to the body. Whereas David's pre-extended his front arm, and that's a barred front arm. So the two areas that David can focus on are actually the three areas. Number one, set up his stance with his front foot slightly open. Number two, work on a coiling move of his front knee, front hip, and front shoulder to take away that backwards sway. And the last thing is the torque drill. The torque drill will enable David to get the feeling of starting the hips first and then having the shoulders and the bat follow